Welcome to the ETD instruction video on how to understand copyright for your thesis, dissertation, or capstone project. While submitting your record to the ETD repository, you will have to answer two questions regarding copyright. The first question asks, does your thesis or dissertation contain content such as a previously published article for which you no longer own copyright? This question is in regards to your own work that has been published prior to submitting your record to the ETD repository. If you published your work in an open access journal or with a CC license, you can reuse your work without requesting permissions from the publisher. If your work was published by a journal that requires a subscription or payment for access to the articles, you may have signed away your copyrights. You can find information regarding any copyright you retained in the publisher agreement you signed upon submitting your article. Some publisher agreements will include a clause that states the published work may be reused for educational purposes, such as inclusion in a dissertation repository. If you have not yet signed a publisher agreement for work you intend on publishing prior to submitting your record to the ETD repository, you can request the publisher add this clause to the agreement. If this clause does not exist in the publisher agreement you signed, you may need to contact the publisher to ensure you have the permission to reuse the published work in your record before submitting to the ETD repository. If you require assistance understanding your publisher agreement, please contact the Scholarly Communications Office Copyright Librarian. The second question on copyright is in regards to fair use. This asks, does your thesis or dissertation contain any third-party text, audiovisual content, or other material which is beyond a fair use and would require permissions? When determining if your work can be considered fair use, there are 4 factors to consider. The first is the purpose and character of the use. Is the way you are using the material transformative from the original intent by the copyright holder? As an example, if you were to include photos from an ad campaign for a popular soda brand, the original purpose of the ads were to sell the item depicted. If you use these images to try to sell an item of your own creation, this would be infringement of the copyrighted works. However, if you were to use these images to comment on the changing views of youth culture over time, this would be considered transformative from the original intent of the copyrighted work, and you could argue for fair use without having to ask permissions from the copyright holder. The next factor to consider is the nature of the copyrighted work. Are you using a copyrighted work that is artistic and potentially one of a kind, that was created by one individual and has not been duplicated elsewhere? Or is the nature of the work factual and multiple variations of this work can be found from a variety of sources? If the work you are presenting in your ETD record has a limited visibility outside of the repository, the copyright holder may argue for infringement unless you have received permissions for reuse. The third factor is in regards to the amount and substantiality of the copyrighted work. This can be broken down into 2 parts. The first is the percentage of the work. If you would like to directly quote an entire paragraph from a published work, the full length of the published work is a factor to consider. If the full work is over 200 pages, one paragraph would be a microscopic percentage and is unlikely to infringe on copyright. However, if the full work is a 1-page article, quoting a full paragraph would be a substantial percentage of the final work and could be considered copyright infringement. The other thing to consider is whether or not you are reusing the heart of the work. This could also be considered the spoiler alert factor. If the portion of the copyrighted work that you have added to your ETD record presents key information from the copyright holder's original work, this may be considered copyright infringement. For example, if you have not seen Star Wars, please skip ahead. If you were trying to explain Star Wars to someone who had never seen it, you may tell them that Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker are enemies that fight each other with laser swords. You are unlikely to tell them that Vader is actually Luke's father. These three factors of fair use all roll into the final consideration, and that is the effect on the potential market or value of the original copyrighted work. As the ETD repository is an open access global repository where researchers will be able to view your work for free, if the information from a copyrighted work that you have included in your record limits the possibility that the original work would be viewed or purchased from the copyright holder, you may be infringing on copyright. If you have any concerns that copyrighted work you are using cannot be justified as fair use, please contact the copyright holder to request permissions. There is a template form available on the ETD instruction sites on how to ask permissions. When it comes to copyright, it is better to ask permission first than to ask for forgiveness later. Thank you for watching the ETD instruction video on how to understand copyright. Please contact the Scholarly Communications Office if you have any additional questions.